Hey everyone, and welcome to your Linux, open source and privacy news fix for the first half of May. This time we have the release of Elementary OS 6 public beta, a new mechanical keyboard from System76, Audacity getting some big backlash after announcing the introduction of telemetry, and some new information about the JingPad A1, a Linux-powered tablet. Let's dive in right after this. This video is sponsored by TuxCare. And if that sounds familiar, it's because TuxCare is the new brand regrouping kernel care and their extended lifecycle support services. So with TuxCare, you now get three main services. The first one is live patching. So your Linux kernel, your libraries, your databases, your virtualizations, your IoT devices can all receive automated security patches that don't need downtime to be applied. They are all patched live. Now the second service is providing an extension to the lifecycle of the Linux kernel, which means that you can use a specific version of the kernel for longer and still be up to date in terms of security, even on an end-of-life distro. And third, they also offer support services which are reasonably priced and flexible because they are vendor independent. As a whole, TuxCare is now an integrated brand of services to automate and improve your Linux operations, so you get more flexibility in choosing the distro you want to run on your servers, when to upgrade it, and you can reduce your maintenance cost without sacrificing security. I left a link in the description below so you can check all the TuxCare services and get a free proof of concept for your organization. Now let's begin with the Linux news, and something that just didn't make the cut for the previous news video. The Elementary OS 6 beta is now available. It's also publicly available and not paywalled like the early access builds. And also, it's an amazing release. Elementary OS 6 is based on Ubuntu 20.04 LTS and revamps the whole theme with the ability to pick between a dark and a light mode and choosing the accent color. It also adds support for trackpad gestures to switch workspaces or display the multitasking view, and implements these gestures inside of various apps too, to go back and forward or dismiss notifications. A new email client is also provided, as well as a reminders application. The App Center backend has also been moved to Flatpak, and a lot of the default apps ship in that format now. I've been using the early access builds on my laptop for months now, and it's already a really stable, polished and fantastic distribution. Now, as always with Elementary, it won't work for all people, as it's not meant to be tweaked and customized heavily, so if the workflow doesn't suit your needs, there aren't many ways to tinker around and change that. As for me personally, I think it's the best distro for my use case, and I can't wait to use the final release. Be warned though, the beta has no upgrade path to that final release, so you might have to tweak the repos manually or just reinstall. Linus Torvalds continued his interview with Tag1 Consulting about open source and its commercial uses and practices. And as for the first part, it's a very interesting read. Torvalds talks about the Linux Foundation, his role in it, and his duties and workflow as a Linux kernel maintainer, as well as his views on commercial uses. He also drops a small jab at the Free Software Foundation, and before you jump on your keyboards out of anger, it has nothing to do with the recent Stallman controversy, more about his views on the almost religious beliefs that the FSF and Stallman encouraged for a time. He also talks about more personal stuff, like moving to the US and his experience there, or his other hobbies. All in all, it's a sensible talk with interesting tidbits and insights into how he runs things, why he did things a specific way, and there are even a few remarks on his past, let's say, very angry days and how he counteracts these tendencies. I encourage you to read it, and the first part as well if you haven't. Now moving on to some hardware news, and there's a lot to talk about here. First, StarLabs, which, if you haven't heard of yet, is a Linux computer manufacturer. These guys introduced their new Starbook Mark V. It's an ultrabook with a 14-inch matte 1080p screen with anti-glare coating, and it comes with Intel's 11th gen CPUs and Intel Xe graphics. As with all previous devices, they ship them with super fast SSDs, what they call over-provisioned drives, which are basically SSDs with super speedy read speeds and write speeds. It has quad speakers, a glass trackpad, and a very nice looking keyboard. I/O is pretty good as well, with two USB 3.0 ports, one USB 2, HDMI, a 3.5mm headphone jack, and a microSD card reader, as well as a USB-C port, which can be used for charging, which is great. It also has open source firmware and lets you change between the AMI, American Megatrends firmware, or Core Boot. I haven't had the pleasure of reviewing it, so if someone at StarLabs is listening to this, don't hesitate to reach out and send me one, because it looks like a great ultrabook with a custom designed chassis, a host of pre-installed distros to choose from, and a starting price of under 1,000 euros taxes included, which isn't bad for what you get. A new video demoed the JingPad A1 hardware. It shows the design, very clearly inspired by the iPad Air and the iPad Pro, and it looks like a very solid device with Gorilla Glass on the front and back, an aluminum frame, a fingerprint sensor to unlock, respectable cameras for these terrible human beings that use tablets to take pictures, and pogo pins on the back for the keyboard add-on. Now we don't really see it run JingOS, except for a few seconds where it doesn't seem to work all that well yet. Now this project has me all excited and wary at the same time. I entered their beta program so I could get one as soon as they start shipping them, which means I also get a discount on the already discounted Indiegogo crowdfunding price, but it's still investing into something that might not ship, might get abandoned quickly, or something that will end up being a terrible product. I'm willing to use that sweet YouTube money to take the risk, so you don't have to. No need to thank me, I'm only doing my job. Huawei launched a new Linux and ARM-powered laptop. The affectionately named Huawei Qingyun L410 laptop uses a high-silicon Kirin 990 system on a chip and has 8GB of RAM and 256GB of SSD, paired with a 14-inch 2K screen, which is a way too high resolution for that size, and a fingerprint reader. It runs Linux, but that's where the fun ends. It uses Unity OS, which is a distro derived from Deepin as a Chinese government initiative to replace foreign operating systems like Windows. So basically, it's a Chinese government-controlled Linux distribution. Also, it's only going to be available for Chinese corps and the Chinese government, which means that that first big Huawei ARM laptop isn't necessarily going to be the flagship for ARM on Linux, as it probably will never come to Europe or the US. Still, it's interesting to see that more manufacturers are jumping on the ARM train. Let's hope all that excitement might materialize into something that we get to use and that isn't completely locked down. Now, System76 opened their new keyboard for pre-orders. It's called Launch, and it's a mechanical, customizable USB keyboard with fully open source specs. The design itself and the firmware are 100% open and available for anyone to pick up on. It also serves as a USB hub with 2 USB-C ports and 2 USB-A as well. It looks like an interesting product and brings some changes to the default QWERTY layout, with the spacebar key split in 2 and various adjustments to the size and disposition of the keys. Now, fortunately, the keys are swappable, and the keyboard even comes with an extra set of keycaps so you can make it work how you like and save the layout to the board itself so you don't have to reconfigure it on each device. That's a very nice touch. This keyboard will set you back $285, which isn't cheap by any means, but it looks like it's really well made. That's not something I will use personally, as this keyboard's key features, get it, don't really appeal to me, and I have a hard time using mechanical keyboards. They always induce wrist pain in my arms, but for people who need such a board, I think it's a pretty good option. The design itself also doesn't look like the type of thing I'd proudly display on my desk, with 80s style beige and browns, and being tethered to USB is a terrible flaw in my opinion, but to each their own. People who are interested can now pre-order it, and I think they're gonna have a lot of fun with this thing. Now let's move on to gaming. Proton 6.4-3 was released, and it's mainly composed of fixes that were previously in Proton Experimental. But now everyone can enjoy an updated version of DXVK, the Origin overlay is now functional, which means that the co-op game It Takes Two is now playable with friends, and a bunch of other games should now work well, like Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord, Evil Genius 2, Zombie Army 4, Strange Brigade, or EVE Online, since these games had issues with their launchers. Deus Ex, yes, the old one, the first one, and other old games can now have a working gamma brightness slider, which is cool. And finally, Far Cry Primal also gained Xbox controller detection. A quick update in the form of Proton 6.4-4 was also released a few days after that, fixing a recent issue since the latest 2K Games Launcher update. Some DX12 games had an error on startup that has also been fixed, and Star Wars Squadrons VR was launching to the desktop incorrectly, which is now fixed as well. And on Proton Experimental specifically, Resident Evil Village is now fully playable using that version of the compat layer, which is amazing as being chased by a tall vampire lady through a Dracula-style castle is definitely one of my favorite pastimes. Wine 6.8 was released, and this version installs libraries in architecture-specific subfolders, which I guess will help in tidying stuff up. The Secure 32 library has been converted to the PE executable format, and it also fixes 35 bugs, including for Crisis Wars, Star Citizen, Age of Empires 2, The Sims Complete Collection, Sins of a Solar Empire Rebellion, FIFA 11, Sacred Gold, or the first Diablo. It will serve as the base for future Proton releases as well, so all these fixes should make their way to your Steam library in the near future. And to complete this video, let's talk about apps. First, Spotify is rolling out a redesign of its client, including for Linux. It's a server-side change, so you'll have to wait for it to update, but the new design is a lot more coherent with the mobile app and looks a bit more modern than the older desktop client did. The search feature is now accessible from everywhere in the sidebar, and playlist creation is also a lot easier. Now it also looks to be following that new design trend of everything needs to be big, which might irk some people, but since it's a server-side change, there might not be a way to opt out of the new interface for people who prefer the previous one. I personally don't use Spotify anymore, but I like the fact that they're providing a Linux client, even though its integration with our desktops isn't great, for example with the album artwork not showing up in the media applets. Unfortunately, as OMG Ubuntu points out, there's a GNOME extension for that. Now to the pièce de résistance, Audacity pondered using telemetry to try and gain more knowledge about how people use this venerable tool. This proposition was to implement Google Analytics to track session starts and ends, errors, usage of various effects so they could prioritize development, and the usage of various file formats, as well as the OS and Audacity versions. This telemetry would use an anonymous tracking identifier stored on the device. Now they also wanted to use Yandex Metrica to estimate the daily active users, and both services were going to record the IP address sending the requests. This telemetry was to be disabled by default and optional. Now, as you might expect, there was a huge backlash against this addition, and they announced that they would drop the proposition altogether, instead limiting themselves to implement Sentry error reporting. Now, I have mixed opinions on this one. On the one hand, you simply can't easily prioritize what to work on without telemetry. You can do surveys or forums, they're all fine, but they are way harder to translate into something really actionable, and telemetry data is just way more representative of your user base than forums or surveys. On the other hand, use of Google and Yandex tools is definitely a big mistake. People are wary of these big companies and the usage they make of the data collected through their tools, and that's definitely not something I would have picked. Now the question is, could we work on an open source telemetry tool that would be comforting for people, transparent, and still would let various projects get some insights on what to work on and what their users want? I think that's a good idea, but then again it's mine, so obviously I would think that. And finally, KDE Connect's Android app got a nice makeover, removing the dated orange slabs of colors that were in its menu. The update really makes the app look more modern, although it's a bit black and white now and could use a bit more graphical elements, maybe presenting the various features in a grid of icons instead of a list. It also now reports the phone's signal strength to the desktop client, it lets you switch audio inputs, it can extract MMS attachments, and added a basic mouse receiver. This new release is fully compatible with all the desktop clients and JS Connect as well, so there is no reason not to update. KDE Connect is a fantastic app, bringing Apple-level integration between an Android phone and a Linux desktop, and if you're not already using it, you're missing out. For regular Android users, it's already available on the Play Store, and I got the update on my /e phone as well. And that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't hesitate to like or dislike if you didn't. You can also subscribe and turn on notifications to get more videos like this one, and if you'd prefer to watch my videos somewhere else than on YouTube, I'm also on Odyssey. I'll left a link in the description below. Now you can also join my amazing Patreon subscribers and YouTube members and get access to a weekly patroncast every Monday and the right to vote on the next topics I'll cover. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!